You ever spend years being the safe one, the quiet partner, the spreadsheet girl, the one who pays bills on time, doesn't interrupt meetings, and always double checks the tax deductions? That was me. And for the longest time, he thought that made me predictable, controllable, forgettable. I remember that Thursday night, frying salmon while the kitchen filled with that buttery garlic heat. He walked in, glowing like he just closed $1 million deal, set his phone on speaker, and poured himself a drink like he owned the world. "You just keep doing your spreadsheets," he said, laughing. "One day, this whole thing's gonna pay off tenfold." I smiled, stirred the asparagus, didn't say a word, but something in me cracked a little. Not because he was dreaming big, but because he had already made me disappear inside those dreams. For him, I was the steady hand behind the curtain, the silent investor, the placeholder wife. He didn't know I'd already started keeping copies, didn't know the documents he rushed past were filed under my legal name, didn't see the quiet way I mapped everything out. Every dollar, every clause, every contingency. Because I used to believe love meant trust. But that night, in the flickering light of our open-plan kitchen, I realized something sharper. Trust without protection is just a gamble. And I was done being the one left empty-handed when the house of cards fell. He thought I'd stay quiet, like always. He had no idea how loud silence could get. It started like most Silicon Valley fairy tales do. Big ideas scribbled on napkins, midnight coding sessions. Words like disruption, seed funding, freedom, tossed around like promises too big to question. He had a vision, some revolutionary blockchain solution for microtransactions. Said it would change the way creators get paid. Said it just needed time and money. So I gave him both. I cashed out my 401k, refinanced the condo I bought before we ever met, even postponed my own promotion just to keep the bills from stacking. We called it temporary. 1 year, maybe 2, until he landed that magical Series A round. But 2 years turned into 4. The app was still buggy, the investors still circling, and I was still sitting at the kitchen table every Sunday night, balancing the books like some kind of unpaid CFO. And the thing is, I wasn't angry at first. Not really. I believed in the dream. I believed in him. But belief fades fast when the gas gets shut off. He was chasing investors in LA, sipping cold brew in co-working spaces, while I was calling the electric company asking for one more extension. And when I asked, just gently, if we could maybe downsize or pause for a few months, he sighed, said I wasn't thinking big enough, that all empires need risk. And I swear to you, he said it with a straight face. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a partnership. It was a pipeline. My credit, my name, my silence, all fueling something I didn't even recognize anymore. It wasn't a startup dream. It was a financial nightmare. And I was the only one paying to keep the lights on. There's a moment you start to vanish, and you don't even realize it until you already have. At first, it was small. He stopped looping me into meetings, said things like, "This one's just technical," or "You wouldn't want to sit through all that jargon." So I stopped asking, stopped offering input, stopped showing up on the Zoom calls I used to help prepare for. Instead, I stayed in the background, juggling bills, tracking receipts, keeping his business legally alive behind the scenes. I became a shadow. He'd introduce me at networking events as the real MVP, then spend the rest of the night talking about his own genius like I wasn't even standing there. And yet, I still showed up. still cooked dinner, still smiled politely when he bragged about bootstrapping everything like my bank account didn't exist. But deep down, something shifted. I started keeping backup files, drafting emails I never sent, saving every receipt, every equity contract, every NDA he asked me to just sign real quick. And when he asked why I insisted on staying on the LLC documents, I told him it was just for taxes. He laughed, called me paranoid, but signed anyway. He never noticed that the business address was under my name, never checked who actually filed the articles of incorporation, never cared that the domain was linked to my private server. Because I was the good one, the easy wife, the ghost that cleaned up messes and didn't ask for credit. And while he spent nights crafting visions for angel investors and daydreaming about IPOs, I was quietly building something of my own. Not a startup, not a revenge plan, just protection. Because even ghosts have limits, and I was done disappearing for someone else's spotlight. It was a Wednesday night, rain tapping against the kitchen window, soft and rhythmic, like the world was trying to stay quiet for me. I was sipping cold chamomile, the kind that usually helps me sleep. My laptop glowed in the dark. Just one more look at the financials before bed. Old habit. I wasn't snooping. Not really. He'd left his email logged in on the shared desktop. I only meant to check the Stripe account, confirm a wire transfer went through. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. There it was. Subject line, exit strategy, final steps. And when I opened it, my stomach fell straight through the floor. A thread of messages between him and some early investor. They weren't discussing projections. They weren't negotiating Series A. They were planning a sale, a full acquisition, cash up front, no disclosures to the silent partner. That's what he called me, the silent partner. And then the line that burned itself into my memory. Once the wire hits, I'm out. Got a place in Costa Rica lined up. Nicole's already packing. Nicole, the intern, the same one who used to bring us coffee and say things like, "You guys are a couple goals." The same girl who looked me in the eye while handing me the office keys. Suddenly, everything made sense. The late nights, the new cologne, the way he started locking his phone during dinner, then blaming NDAS when I asked. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I just sat there, watching the cursor blink under his digital betrayal, like it was waiting for me to reply. But I didn't. Instead, I logged out, closed the lid, and stared at the rain until the tea went cold. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's the sound of something deep inside you, turning solid, clicking into place. That night, I didn't break. I calculated. And the one thing he never understood about me? I don't need noise to make an impact, just leverage. And I already had more than he ever knew. People think revenge starts with rage, with shouting, confrontation, messy scenes, and broken glass. But that's not how it works. Not for someone like me. Mine started with folders, Dropbox links, a Google sheet labeled Q4 Backup Personal Use. I'd been building the trail for over a year, without even realizing that's what I was doing. It began as protection, just copies, scanned contracts, emails forwarded to a private account he didn't know existed. At first, I didn't plan to use them. I just wanted to understand, because there were too many gaps in the numbers, too many trust me conversations that ended with me footing the bills. And the deeper I looked, the more I realized I wasn't just being ignored, I was being erased. So I started making moves, quietly, transferred company registration to my own holding LLC, filed an amendment to the ownership docs through a second lawyer, one whose name never appeared on any of our shared records. He didn't notice, because he was too busy chasing buzzwords and flirting in Slack channels. He thought he was CEO, but legally, he was just an employee, with no voting power, no equity, no exit rights. And the best part? He'd handed me the pen. Every "just sign this real quick" document, every time he skipped the fine print, he was writing his own ending. I set up a failsafe, too, a clause in the transfer terms that blocked any sale or acquisition without dual authentication. Mine was the only verified key. I didn't need revenge. I just needed protection. A firewall made of paperwork and patience. And now, as I stared at that email thread, with him planning his escape like I didn't even exist, I felt nothing but calm, because he thought I was just the wife, just the wallet, just the afterthought. But I was the architecture, the back end, the blueprint, and the structure was about to collapse, exactly how I designed it. The night before everything was supposed to go down, he lit candles. Real ones. Not the electric flickering kind from Amazon, but the thick, waxy, cinnamon-scented kind we used to save for anniversaries. There was music, something soft and acoustic, a bottle of red breathing by the window, and a table set for two, like we were newlyweds again. He called it a reset night, said we'd been distant, blamed startup stress and investor pressure. Promised things would feel different soon. Bigger, better, free. I nodded, chewed slowly, pretended the steak wasn't overcooked, laughed at the same stories I'd heard 10 times before. But behind the wine glass, I saw it clearly now. This wasn't romance. It was a curtain call. He was buying time, stalling, trying to ease his guilt with medium-rare ribeye and meaningless compliments. And in between bites, he reached for my hand and said, "You've been incredible. Seriously, I couldn't have done this without you." It sounded like a toast, but it felt like a goodbye, because what he didn't know, what he never thought to consider, was that while he was pouring wine, I had already locked the digital vault. While he was charming investors, I was double verifying the smart contract that blocked unauthorized sales. While he was planning an exit with someone who wore designer sneakers and said "like" 3 times in every sentence, I was sitting across from him, smiling, knowing everything. He thought this dinner was a distraction, a smokescreen, maybe even a test to see if I knew. But I wasn't playing his game anymore. I already had the board, the timer, the final move. So I clinked my glass, kissed him on the cheek, and told him to get some sleep, because tomorrow he'd need all the rest he could get. He walked into that office like a man who already won, wore his best jacket, the tailored navy one with the subtle checkered pattern that made him look taller in investor photos. Fresh haircut, fresh cologne, that same smug confidence he wore like armor. The meeting was set for 10 a.m. sharp. A sleek glass boardroom, 2 representatives from the acquiring firm, and a laptop opened to the final wire transfer screen. The terms were clear. 7 figures. Upfront cash. No questions asked. Just sign and walk away. The intern was there too. Nicole, perched at the edge of her seat, pretending to be a strategic advisor when just weeks ago she couldn't tell a balance sheet from a breakfast menu. He clicked through the final steps like it was a game he'd already won, hands moving fast, breath steady, smile locked in place. But then Transaction failed. Authorization required. He blinked, clicked again. Access denied. There was a moment, just a flicker, where the room shifted. The investors leaned in. Nicole's eyes narrowed, and he froze. This must be a glitch, he mumbled. Tried refreshing the screen, typing in his password again. Still, nothing. Then came the prompt. Secondary key required. Legal owner authentication pending. And just like that, it hit him. The color drained from his face, like someone had pulled the plug on his bravado. He scrambled through his phone, texted, called, refreshed again. But nothing moved. Because the key wasn't his. It never had been. And the look on his face. It wasn't panic at first. It was confusion. Genuine disbelief that he wasn't in control. That the woman he dismissed, ignored, used, was the one holding the final piece. The investors exchanged glances. Nicole stood up, slowly, and all he could say was, I don't understand. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. But it was. Exactly how it was supposed to go. Because while he was crafting dreams on PowerPoint slides, I was writing the code on the back end, building the walls around the treasure chest he thought was his. And in that moment, his big payday unraveling before his eyes, he realized the truth. The company wasn't his to sell. Not anymore. Not ever. The video call connected just as his voice was starting to crack. He hadn't expected to see me. Not there. Not then. But I wanted him to look me in the eyes. One last time. I sat in my home office, hair tied back, glasses on. The same desk where I'd spent years quietly fixing every one of his financial disasters. Now, it was the war room. Hi, I said calmly. No anger, no accusations, just a slow inhale and the click of a folder opening on my screen. I believe you're trying to authorize a sale, I continued, and I'm here to let the room know that transaction isn't going through. The investors turned their heads. You could feel the tension crackle across the call, like someone had cut the power but left the heat. I pulled up the legal structure, shared my screen. There it was, ownership documents filed under my holding company. Voting rights, 100%. Signature requirement, dual auth. Transfer authority, me. He tried to interrupt, to say I was misunderstanding the structure, that this wasn't how it was supposed to be, but I kept speaking. Clear, slow, unshakable. This company was built on my money, my credit, and my silence. But silence isn't the same as absence. I've been here, the entire time. Nicole shifted in her seat. One of the investors muted their mic, and he just stared, no words left. For the first time, he understood. This wasn't about bitterness. This wasn't revenge in the way he imagined it. Loud, messy, public. This was precision. He thought he was the company, the founder, the visionary. But the truth? I was the signature behind every filing, the architect behind every wire, the one who never got thanked, because he assumed I'd never need to be, until now. So I ended the call with the same quiet he once mistook for weakness. I'll be in touch with your lawyer, but you won't be speaking for this company again. Then I clicked leave meeting and let the silence speak for me. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. A few hours after the call, he was back at the apartment, the one he'd started calling ours when he moved Nicole in. She was already waiting, arms crossed, suitcase packed, and a look that said she didn't come to play dumb. There was no yelling, just this heavy, suffocating silence between them, the kind that only exists when both people know the truth, and neither one wants to say it out loud. She held up her phone. I saw the meeting, she said flatly. No equity. No deal. She owns everything? He tried to explain, said it was a misunderstanding, that I had manipulated the filings, that it was still salvageable. But every word sounded thinner than the last. Nicole had heard enough. She wasn't the type to go down with the ship, especially not one built on half-truths and borrowed confidence. She looked him dead in the eyes and said, "You said she was just background noise, a spreadsheet girl, a liability." Then she turned toward the door. "But she just undid everything you built without even raising her voice." And just like that, she was gone. No dramatic slam, no parting shot, just the soft click of a door closing on the fantasy he built out of arrogance and assumption. He was left standing there, alone in a living room filled with startup merch, fake awards, and vision boards that now meant nothing. His empire hadn't crumbled because of bad code or market conditions. It fell apart because he bet against the wrong woman, the one he thought would never fight back, the one he didn't think could. But I didn't have to fight. I just had to wait. He lost the deal, lost the girl, and for the first time, he realized the real power had never been in his hands. It had been sitting quietly at the margins, watching, listening, preparing. And when the moment came, I didn't have to raise my voice to end the story. I just had to let him hear it, through the sound of her footsteps leaving. There was no press release, no victory lap, no smug post on LinkedIn with #girlboss and champagne emojis, just a quiet office, one lawyer, and a 3-page contract that changed everything. I didn't want the spotlight. I wanted closure. So when the acquisition firm called me the next day, asking if the offer was still on the table, I said yes, with one condition. The sale would go through cleanly, anonymously. No mention of the founder, no credit given to his vision, and absolutely no trace of our names attached to the press. The lawyer blinked. "Don't you want your story told?" I smiled. "Number, I want it done." Because here's the thing, no one tells you about real freedom. It's quiet. It's not a headline. It's a signature. It's walking away without needing anyone to clap. They reviewed the documents, adjusted the numbers slightly, and wired the funds within 48 hours. Just like that, what he once called his life's work became my clean break. No drama, no courtroom, no war, just a woman who saw the collapse coming and built an escape hatch while he was busy admiring the view from the top. I forwarded a copy of the finalized agreement to the email he still used for his old investor updates. No message, no subject line, just the document. Let him read it in whatever cheap apartment he ended up in. Let him scroll through the numbers and realize that the final chapter wasn't even his to write, because I didn't just outmaneuver him, I outgrew him. And when you've been used, dismissed, and underestimated long enough, the best revenge isn't a dramatic confrontation. It's disappearing with everything they thought they owned. The condo was quiet, not the kind of quiet you cherish, the kind that hums with emptiness. The fridge still buzzed, the AC still kicked on, but it all felt hollow. I stood in the living room, barefoot on the hardwood floors we once picked out together. He wanted walnut, I wanted maple. We compromised, like always. Now, none of it mattered. The deal was closed, the money cleared, and I had exactly 1 weekend left on the lease before the new owners took over. So I packed slowly. Not just clothes and chargers, but pieces of a life I no longer recognized. Old notebooks, A photo frame turned face down months ago. A mug that read Hustle Wife, cracked at the handle. I left most things behind. Because, truthfully, I didn't need them anymore. The wedding album stayed on the shelf. So did the box of startup swag. Logo pens, lanyards, a hoodie that never quite fit. I didn't want to burn it all. That would have meant it still held power. Instead, I just walked away. But there was one last thing I did take. Tucked in the back of the closet, behind a stack of unused tech gear, was a worn envelope. Inside, a letter I had written to myself 2 years ago. Back when I first felt myself fading. Back when I thought love meant enduring. Back when I still believed he might notice the weight I was carrying. I reread it, line by line, and for the first time, it didn't feel like desperation. It felt like a warning I'd finally listened to. So I folded it up, slipped it into my bag, and left the rest behind. No goodbye note, no second thoughts, just the click of the door closing, a woman carrying nothing but a single bag, and the kind of peace that only comes after burning down a version of yourself you no longer owe anyone. The GPS signal dropped 3 turns before the driveway. All that was left was gravel, pine trees, and the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty. It feels like exhale. The cabin wasn't much. 1 bedroom, tiny kitchen, no smart appliances, no startup buzzwords taped to the fridge, just creaking wood and the scent of cedar that clung to the walls like memory. I unlocked the door with a key that still smelled like hardware store plastic, stepped inside, dropped the single bag on the floor, and stood there, still. No notifications, no Slack pings, no second voice in my head reminding me to optimize every minute of my life. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to be, no one to perform for, nothing left to prove. There were birds in the morning, crackling firewood at night, and hours, whole hours, where I just stared at the lake through the dusty window and let the stillness do what it needed to do. People think healing is loud, like breakthrough moments or grand epiphanies. But mine came slow, like learning to breathe in again after holding your lungs still for far too long. I started cooking for one, chopping vegetables just because it felt grounding, reading paperbacks I'd forgotten I owned, falling asleep without headphones, without podcasts, without someone else's voice telling me what to fix about myself. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't aesthetic, but it was real. And maybe most important of all, it was mine. He took years from me, time, money, identity, confidence, but he didn't get this. He didn't get the part of me that survived, the part that chose silence over spectacle, that chose stillness over revenge. I didn't need a comeback tour, didn't need to prove I won. I just needed this one cabin, this one quiet life, and the kind of freedom that never asks you to explain where you've been. I wasn't looking for it. I was just scrolling through my phone one morning, halfway through coffee, watching the steam curl into sunlight, when his face popped up on my screen. A YouTube thumbnail, a familiar jawline, that same half smile he used to wear at investor brunches. The title, How I Lost Everything, the truth behind my startup collapse. Curiosity isn't weakness, it's just human. So I tapped play. There he was, filmed in some bare apartment with echoing walls and a ring light too bright for the mood, wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big, as if that somehow made him look humbler. He talked about betrayal, about being cut out of his own company, about how people took advantage of his trust and manipulated legal loopholes. Not once did he say my name, but he didn't have to. He painted himself the victim, spun stories about long nights and sacrifice, about how he was building something for everyone, while unnamed forces worked behind his back. The comments were full of support, people calling him brave, telling him to keep going, offering jobs, sympathy, prayers. And I just sat there, watching him rewrite history in real time, like truth was something you could edit for engagement. But here's the thing about stories. They only matter if you believe them, and I didn't need to anymore. I didn't comment, didn't like or dislike, didn't text him some final mic drop he could screenshot for drama. I just sipped my coffee, let the video autoplay into silence, and stared back out the window, because he was still talking, still chasing the narrative, still trying to make noise loud enough to drown out the truth. But the truth doesn't need volume, it just needs time, and eventually, even his voice will run out of things to say. Some people think power looks like a mic drop, a dramatic confrontation, a viral moment. But I've learned real power is quieter than that. It's in the pause before you speak, and the decision not to. It's the email you never respond to, the argument you don't join, the call you let ring out, just to hear it stop. Because silence, it isn't surrender, it's strategy. He wanted a reaction, needed one, actually, to validate his version of the story, to prove I was the villain, but I never gave it to him. Not in words, not in posts, not even in private. And that, more than anything, drove him mad. Because the truth? You can't spin silence. You can't screenshot it. Can't twist it into something it's not. It just exists. Steady. Solid. Unmoving. People around me started asking if I'd ever tell my side. If I'd ever go public. If I'd ever set the record straight. But I don't owe the world a performance. And I certainly don't owe him closure. He built a world that needed noise. Attention. Approval. Applause. I built something else. Something quieter. Something real. And in the end, the silence I held, it said more than 1,000 clever replies ever could. Because when you stop trying to win, you start to live. And that, I've learned, is the loudest thing you'll ever do. If you've ever been underestimated, called too quiet, too careful, too soft to matter, I hope you hear me now. Because sometimes the ones they overlook are the ones building the whole foundation underneath their feet. They called me passive, supportive, background. But background doesn't mean powerless, and quiet doesn't mean invisible. I didn't scream. I didn't fight dirty. I didn't burn it all down just to feel seen. I planned. I protected. And when the moment came, I walked away with everything. So if you've ever sat in silence, feeling the weight of what someone took from you, time, credit, identity, space, know this: you are allowed to take it back, not with rage, but with clarity, with strategy, with the kind of power that doesn't need a spotlight to shine. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever been written off or written out, I want you to leave a comment. Not for me, but for you. Let this be your moment to say, I'm still here, and I see myself now. Tap like if you've ever held your tongue just to keep the peace. Subscribe if you believe in stories where strength isn't loud, just steady. Share this with someone who's quietly building their comeback in the dark. Because silence isn't weakness. It's the storm before a reckoning. And yours might be closer than you think.